Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, October 9th, and we have just entered the beginning of week 3. And we are going to start out the session today with a bit of peer review, just in the same way that we did last Tuesday with our 2D platformer submissions. So as of now, you have created all of the music and sound effects for Angry Bots. And I have a couple of submissions here. We got 3 of them to take a listen to. And you have now completed all of the music and sound effects for both of our projects, 2D Platformer and Angry Bots. And the new assignments and topic for this week, which we will get into and discuss after listening to our submissions here, we will start discussing the technical side of this process, where you take your music and sound effects WAV files, and we are going to use a software program called Wise, which is known as audio middleware, and it is software between you and your audio and the code in the game, so that you don't ever have to deal with any of that portion of it, but it still allows you to set up your music and sound effects to work properly in the game. So after listening to these submissions, we will switch over to a discussion of the new assignments and a discussion of how to use Wise to get your music and sound effects working in the game. So by the end of this week, you should be able to hear your custom music and sound effects playing back in the game. And then it often reveals tweaks and changes that need to occur. So you can still continue to do that all the way up until the final delivery in week 4. So if you have any questions from the compositions, either 2D Platformer or Angry Bots, or the sound design of those projects, and of course, as you get into Wise this week, please contact me with any sort of issues or challenges that you may run into in getting everything set up. So as you see here, we have 3 submissions from the Angry Bots composition project. So as opposed to 2D Platformer last week, where we had each student submission had their own track, here everything is vertically laid out on top of each other. And you'll see each student submission has a different marker indicating kind of the groups of tracks here that we're working with. Move this over. All right, so I'll do it this way. All right. So we have the ambient cue, the buzzer cue, the mech cue, the spider cue, and then the 3 stingers down here. As you can see from these examples, everything starts at the same time and ends in the same time, so that allows them to play back and work together. If you did not take the chance to set up your bounced files and listen to them and play them back this way, make sure you do that so you get a sense of how the files are supposed to sound when they're going to be played back together in the game. I will be playing the part of the mixer in the game, where the game will be mixing all of your levels up and down according to whatever is happening in the game. No, panning. And I'm just going to bring these faders up and down so we can listen to the different combinations and listen to how the tracks play back together. And at some point, I'll bring all 4 faders up to unity, and we will check the overall level. We'll listen to how they sound when playing back together. So let me just do an overview of the composition as a whole and what we're listening for with this type of game soundtrack. And then we'll go through each one of them one by one. So we'll start again with the formatting of the files. We need to make sure that these are all going to play back together. So they start at the same time, they end at the same time, they should be in the same key, they should be at the same tempo and time signature so that they will make sense when playing back at the same time. One of the biggest things that can be thrown off when listening to these playing back at the same time is either dissonance in the melody or harmony or clashing rhythms as they play back in different time signatures and different tempos. More than likely, you chose a key, you stuck with it, you chose a tempo and a time signature, and you stuck with it. Even then, there are opportunities for different types of chords to clash against each other. In the same key, you probably aren't going to really clash a whole bunch, but there are certainly intervals and combinations that sound less pleasing than others. So you still have to focus on how the how the tracks work individually and how they work together when playing with the other cues. Let's see. So that's formatting. Let's do mix. We want to make sure that no one cue is ridiculously louder or quieter than the others so that it would get masked when played back with the other cues. We want to make sure, like I mentioned, when we play all four of these at the same time, that it doesn't completely overload the master. And so looking at these four cues in each one of these submissions, they look at a similar volume between each cue, and the four of them together may not completely overload the master. So those are some of the things we're listening for in the mix. Nothing is completely overbearing or completely masked by any other cue. Next would be instrumentation. The instrumentation needs to be unique in each cue. The only instrumentation that is contained in a particular file or a particular cue is the instruments that are unique to it. No instrumentation should repeat in multiple cues so that it does not overlap and double and triple that particular instrument or sound. So if you have the same bass line or the same hi-hat pattern or something, and it exists in multiple cues, especially playing the exact same rhythm, the exact same part from the exact same sound, then it will stack, it will double, it will triple, and when you combine all four of them together, it will be much too loud for those particular instruments. So that often can happen with drums and maybe some pad or something like that exists in the ambient, but also exists in all the other cues. So only unique instrumentation for each cue. Then each action cue. So one of the big things that we're listening for from the composition is the difference between the ambient and the action cues. The ambient cue shouldn't have too much energy in it, but it should still have change and development. It could be outlining the chord progression with a series of pads. It can have a low bass line or maybe some sort of rhythmic pulse. It could have some rhythm to it, and it should actually foreshadow the pacing and rhythm that's coming up in the ambient cue. But watch out for really strong melodies and really strong drum patterns that are going to exist and repeat over and over again all the way throughout the game. Leave a lot of the power and instrumentation and intensity to the action cues. There you need to have a noticeable rise and change in the intensity of the music. This represents robots chasing you around with rocket launchers and explosions and lasers and all this stuff. So it needs to be intense and strong, and a noticeable change in the action in the music when each one of these cues is introduced. So that's instrumentation, composition. Typically, to create a lot of action and energy in a particular cue, that comes from the drums. It also comes from other rhythmic elements, and it comes from. You should also have a strong thematic instrument. It could be a traditional melody on some sort of orchestral instrumentation, or it could be more textural and tonal, and depends on the style and genre of the music. It could go way more synthetic, since the whole game is kind of more futuristic and technology, techie based. Um, yeah, instrumentation, composition, formatting, mix, looping. Those are a lot of the things that we will hear in the ambient and action cues. That would leave the stingers. We have the 3 stingers down here. These are going to play when a particular action cue starts. And you are not going to be aware of when it starts or stops, because it's determined by the game. I mean, I guess you'll hear it starting and stopping, but the actual location, you're never going to be guaranteed that it will actually land on a downbeat or start at the beginning of a pattern or anything like that. So they shouldn't be rhythmic. They should not be tonal in any sort of way. They shouldn't clash against whatever might happen in one of the action cues. So these are a good shape overall. They should start out strong and fade out to silence, have a strong attack, and then fade out quickly. Do watch out for any little gaps at the head of a file. That will cause timing issues, where the action will happen here, and then a half second later you'll actually hear the stinger. So watch out for that. We want to make sure they are loud enough and strong enough, so having a good solid waveform and good level on each one of the cues works well. None of them are getting cut off by the end of the file. This one looks like it gets close, but it does actually reach silence. This almost looks like a kind of a backward sweep or something. Watch out for maybe ones that might be too short overall, or may not stick out enough in the mix. The stingers are definitely the ones that are most open to interpretation. I often describe them as having 2 strong parts to them, a hard impact, low end or bass drop or some big hit that is going to create the distraction, and then some interesting ear candy modulation, filter sweep effect sort of thing on top that provides more of the interest overall. All right, so I think that is a pretty thorough discussion of what we're looking for from each one of these cues. Of course, there'll be more to discuss as we go. We'll listen to them at one at a time, and then I'll bring up each fader to combine and check it out. So let's start with the first one here. All right, so I hear a little bit of a rhythmic pattern. I hear the keys, the piano. Hear some pads in the background. I do hear the repetition of the piano phrase, the bum, bang, bam, bam, bum, bam, bam. So it seems to have repeated itself 4 times. Try for a little bit more variation or development over the cue. It loops well. It is got a good kind of foundation for the rest of the cues. So let's go ahead and bring in the buzzer. So same sort of thing with the strings. It's a good idea, but then it repeats itself 4 times over without any sort of development. It's almost like you could slice this down into one 8-bar loop and just keep that all the way through. So do develop those lines. Maybe a little bit more percussion than just the hi-hat. Maybe just putting some big bass drum hits where that open hi-hat is on the downbeat of each bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That would just create a little bit more intensity to build up, because it still hasn't really reached a stronger level of intensity overall. Let's go ahead and bring in the spider. The other thing with that that piano, like I still hear that piano at the top in the ambient cue quite a bit. It's also the same lines that the violins are playing and the brass are playing. So have some variation there. It sounds like the same MIDI was just copied to multiple instruments to call it different instrumentation layers to fill it out. But having separation in the movement will create much more variation. You can create just as simple lines, but have them move against each other, so when they combine together, it creates different combinations. Again, more drums. Actually, is there any percussion here? No. So yeah, you need the intensity. Like the brass works, there's a low pulsing bass that helps. But again, the power definitely needs to be there. Let's go to the mech. So a great low bass tone, but yeah, no percussion, no strong action to it. It still feels like it's continuing the same kind of 4-bar phrase that was established in the ambient. It's just layered it with different instrumentation, and never really broken out into the intensity that's necessary when you're kind of battling these robots. Let's bring them all in together. Yeah, the biggest or the only percussion I hear is that hi-hat. So develop the progression further. Separate the instrument layers. Don't copy the same MIDI and just copy it to different instruments. And add the percussion to create that intensity. Here are 3 stingers. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right. So they're good sweeps. These would probably be as I was describing before, a low top layer and a low end hit. These all feel more like the top layer, and they need that big impact. So if it is a couple of layers of drums, if it's just a strong hit or impact sound, right at the peak of the pass-bys here. Where the peak of the waveform is, just put some strong drums underneath that, and it hits or bass drop or whatever to provide that impact. But these definitely work on the top end. All right, so a good place to start. Good things to discuss there. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the second submission here. Now, the first thing that I notice here is it looks like drums in these cues, but the action cues here have much lower waveforms. So it seems like the intensity of the action cues will get lost from the ambient cue. All right, so we feels similar in the first half and second half. I'm seeing where seeing how it was repeated in the first half and the second half. Okay. So my first instinct is there's going to be way too much going on in this ambient cue. It almost feels like a song structure where you have a verse-chorus structure and development over the course of the cue. You've got drums, you've got melody, you've got everything that you need, but only in the first cue. So let me add like the buzzer in here. All right, so the buzzer okay, so the buzzer, we got that kind of electric piano sound, delays on it. We got a high synth note there. There's a bass line. Okay, there's the bass line. So, but they're all like the chords or that key part, I guess it's an arpeggiated key part or something like that, or maybe it's just a whole bunch of delays, plays constantly all the way throughout, but the rest of the other layers are kind of sporadic. So they should be, like, you should have bass, you should have drums. You could take the drums out of the ambient cue and start placing them in the other cues, because I'm going to guess, what's the spider got here? All right, more like a string. This almost feels like way more acoustic overall. You got the strings, you got the shaker, and then you got, in the mech, you got a synth and the electric guitar. All right, so they do each have unique instrumentation, but you have one or two instruments focused on each one of these cues, but there's no drums. There's the impact, the intensity that comes from the ambient cue. I would even say that this drum pattern is a little too kind of laid back in the pocket. Like, it makes me want to groove with the robots as opposed to them chasing me around. Almost sounds like a robot dance party or something like that. So work on splitting out the instrumentation. Work with more layers of drums to be able to spread it across the different action cues. Don't consider it as just one pattern all the way through. Use different elements of the rhythm on. You have some elements that are just at the on the bar. You can have things hitting on a half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, and rhythmic combinations of all of that to allow you. You work with double time and half time to give you pockets to fill with rhythm. So if you throw such a straight ahead rhythm in the ambient cue, you don't have much room to go on because you already have your kicks and snares. You've already hit the strongest part is in the ambient cue. So leave like basses and pads in the ambient cue, maybe have a little bit of hi-hat in there, but the drums really come in the action cues, and then layer more instruments into those action cues to fill them out and create more dense instrumentation, more action-packed cues. All right. I'd say the biggest strength is in the different instrumentation. You can hear all four of these and hear which one is which. So definitely continue with that sort of idea, but fill it out with more intensity. All right, here are 3 stingers. All right, so you want to watch out for anything that's pitched or tonal or rhythmic. So this one is both tonal and rhythmic. That will clash against the rest of the music. So you want to make sure something that hits one time, like what happens if we just stuck the very end of this. Or even the da-da-da-da-da-da, that kind of thing creates that rhythm. This is too high-pitched. It needs that low-end impact. Actually, all 3 of them need a hit low-end impact to fill out the bottom end of the mix to create more of that strength. This is just a single guitar line, and it is rhythmic and tonal, and so it would probably clash against whatever else was happening. So make them more like one-shot, less well-defined, more sort of textural would help. All right, let's try one more here. We'll start out with the ambient cue. All right, so the bass line works very, kind of gives you that pulse that's coming up, that kind of foreshadows what's going to happen. It is very constant all the way throughout. You got that kind of sweeping pad in the background. But once the instrumentation has been established, it's pretty much the same all the way throughout. So add the elements, like 1 or 2 layers that fade in, fade out, third of the way through, half the way through. Creates just a little bit of change overall to create some development. Let's go to the buzzer cue. All right, so again, this kind of creates that same vibe. It's like, okay, ready? The big robot's coming out to attack. Here it comes. And then like this wind pad comes in. There's nothing that's like powerful or intense or really frightening about this robot. It's just this kind of whistling wind. It's almost like kind of creeping out on the wilderness or something like that. Where you have much more of a stronger synth vibe here, there's less definition for anything in here. It feels very sparse overall. Let's bring in the spider. Yeah, again. The intensity comes in and it's like my sad friend the spider has now left me or something. It's way more emotional than like pick up your weapons and go out and defeat the enemy or defeat the villain. So definitely looking for power, definitely looking for intensity. Here's the mech. Alright, so now we have, well, I was going to say we have rhythm, but it's the single synth line. So it would be more intensity, more instrumentation, more layers to kind of fill out each one of the particular context of each cue. So all three of these, none of the action cues have any, actually all of these don't have any percussion. And that's really where your intensity is going to lie. Even when you play them all together, you got that repetition of the arpeggiator, the repetition of the three notes in the piano. So create more room for that pacing, that intensity coming from the percussion, and add more layers in that develop over time. Don't just sit in one place and loop around and around and around. All right, so let's go down to the three stingers here. All right, I'd say these sound more like sound effects than impacts or hits. Almost sounds like the sound effect of a robot. Plus, they are subtle enough that they might not stick out through the mix. So, again, strong hit. That fades and gets out of the way. You could probably use some of these elements, put them in a whole bunch of really long reverb, put an extra hit or effect, and add another synth or kind of textural instrument to it, and that will probably give you enough content to work with those stingers. All right, so those are our three submissions with AngryBots. Give us a wide variety of things to discuss. Again, make sure you take the opportunity to listen back to all of your tracks in the same way, because this is how things are going to be set up in the game. If you have any questions as you progress through this week's assignments working with Wise, please reach out and let me know. We want to make sure that everything is technically working for you, and you'll have all of your music and sound effects working by the end of the week. So if you have any questions, come equipped to our Thursday session to get in the answers for those. Right now, we will turn it over to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments for week 3. Thank you very much. Let me know if you have any questions. From the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016. And my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go. Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D platformer Wise setup and Angry Bots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There is a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the WISE project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this Media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch Wise and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other, and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise, and then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that, and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the sound banks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. it's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to we are going to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here. We are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So you can, a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together, and we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, a main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play it one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, play, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time, though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all three of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that the application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's a anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So for this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right. So when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects. Bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. Highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine, so we're going to hit import. I'll just go to project save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy Death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And Taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So I'm going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX Enemy Death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this Jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX Ouch. And the last one here is SFX Taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse, and this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. Gunshot. Health pickup. Browse. Health pickup. Jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container. Taunt. Select taunt random container. All right. Now I have messages. Seem to work.
Oh.
All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit generate. And when you hit generate, this message will pop up, and it says evaluation mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents. Resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this, and you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here, and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get into contact with us, and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely Wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about a minute-long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they're very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. Well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track, and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues, or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, eighth notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition, and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right. So please let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right. Let me know if you have any questions. And other than that, have a good day. Thanks.